Remember your first time playing Atari 2600?
Vaguely. When I was really young, before the NES, my family had the Commodore 64, and we had the Atari 2600. I think the first time I ever played Atari 2600 wasn't even at my house. I think like a neighbor had it.
Yeah, the Atari 2600 was probably the most important video game in existence. I think we were born around the right time when it was still popular. It was after the video game crash had happened, you know, and I didn't know about the crash.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
Oh, there was a video game crash that happened. No, I was just like
I wouldn't have
to play it.
I wouldn't have even understood what that was at that age. I was so young. I was like 3 years old. I would just look at the screen and be like, oh, you know, Pac-Man. Kids that are really young seem to really like Atari a lot because it's so simple and basic.
Yeah.
Because if you play like some of the games on like Xbox and Wii and all that today, some of them are like a little bit too complicated for very, very young kids, like 2, 3, 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
But like Atari, even a really young kid can pick up an Atari game and like see the character moving around. It's very simple. So I think it's a good beginner console for little kids.
It's a good beginner for me. And what I love about the Atari games is that they take a lot of imagination because the graphics are so primitive that you have to imagine what that is, what that's supposed to be. And there's like, you know, on the cover of the game, you can see like, you know, something crazy going on. There's like a guy with a laser gun, and there's like
they have these amazing like paintings that somebody did on the cover. So you're like, wow, this is gonna be great. And then you turn the system on, it's like a square.
It's dun, 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 dun. But it's great. Like there's nothing like Atari. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's just there is nothing like the Atari 2600. It is the king of video game consoles.
Atari's become kind of like forgotten, I feel like, in the past few years. When people go back to retro video games, it's always NES. Like everybody's talking about NES. Not as many people talk about Atari games very much anymore. I feel like it's getting more and more forgotten.
Yeah, it might be because a lot of the games, there isn't very much to say about it. Like, you'll see as we go through this video, we're just going to breeze through a lot of them because you play a game and, you know, there isn't much to say. It's very self-explanatory.
Superman on Atari 2600, there's a lot to say about that game because it's very involved, kind of like an NES game. Whereas if you pop in Q-Bert or something like that, or Asteroids, you're just shooting something.
Yeah.
That's about all there is to it.
The slogan was, "Have you played Atari today?" Dun, 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 dun.
Have you played Atari today? If you haven't seen like all the old Atari commercials, even if you're like not really into the system, you should go check out the commercials at least. There's that one about like Vanguard, right?
Vanguard's my favorite commercial. When they're playing the game and they're like, Who's gonna destroy the god? Luther destroys the god.
And then they show a close up on this guy Luther, and he's like, it's really funny. You know, Atari really like invented the video game genre pretty much. There was arcades before that.
First pause button in a game on the 5200.
Pause button, first wireless controllers.
Yeah.
There was that Sword Quest contest.
Real treasures. Where are those treasures, by the way?
The Atari Mind Link.
Hook it up to your mind.
Yeah, you hook it up to your mind, somehow it controls like they were doing crazy shit back then.
And what's also weird is how like you could play Atari on like a ColecoVision with the right adapter. You know what I mean? It's like you can cross play. Like, because there was Intellivision and
oh, you're saying like how you could hook up a Genesis controller?
You could do that too. You could hook up a Genesis controller, a Sega Genesis controller, and play it on an Atari 2600.
How does that happen?
When does it ever happen?
There must have been some thought that went into that.
I mean, it doesn't benefit. Like, you'll never play Sega Genesis with an Atari 2600 controller. Maybe we should try that sometime.
That's actually interesting. Idea.
Never thought it.
James and Mike play Toe Jam and Earl with Atari controllers. That'll be a new one.
We gotta do Toe Jam and Earl sometime.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, Atari was weird. There were so many weird things with Atari, especially the 2600.
At the Atari offices, where they made all these crazy Atari games, Howard Scott Warshaw, the guy who made the E.T. game, and he also made Indiana Jones and Yars' Revenge. To get inspiration for the Indiana Jones game, you know what he did?
What?
He would walk around the offices cracking a bullwhip, pretending he was Indiana Jones. Kind of like how an actor tries to get into a role, you know, before they do a part. Well, that's what he was doing. But people would come to the Atari offices. You know, they'd have like families or whatever come out. Oh, this is Atari, check it out, you know? And Howard Scott Warshaw would come around the corner like cracking a whip, right? And then the other guy who coded like the Pac-Man game, he did this thing. I think his name was Todd Fry.
Isn't he the guy who had to figure out how to get the arcade Pac-Man onto an Atari 2600?
Which is why the
cartridge.
game wasn't as good as the arcade, which is what people complain about.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was probably a very hard job to do that, to make it, well, making any arcade ports difficult. Anyway, so what he would do, he used to, like, put his hands on the walls and put his feet, like, on the walls and try to, like, walk along the walls. And he'd like, you know, he'd get better at it. So he would do this, like, every day for like a year or something like that. And eventually he got to the point where he was so good at, like, walking along the walls that he could actually, like, turn corners as he was going down the hallways. So imagine walking into, like, Atari Headquarters. You got Howard Scott Warshaw cracking the fucking whip, this guy walking along the walls, and everybody in every other room, like, smoking something.
Like, the thing is, with Atari, it was such a new market. It was such a new business when video games were booming like that. And they didn't really supervise these people. They just let people come into the office whenever they wanted. So people would be there, like, all hours of the night, coming and going. And nobody would really check in on them. They'd just be like, here, make this game, and then turn in the finished game. And they wouldn't, like, there wasn't really any kind of, you know,
it's not like
control.
Yeah, it's not like it is today where, like, let's say Nintendo, like Smash Brothers or something like that. You have a team of probably like 1,000 people or however many people working on the game.
So many people looking at it and so many people
checking it and all this. You know, when they made some of these games, it was one guy who did the graphics and one guy who coded it, and that's it. I almost feel like that it's more creative to do it that way, because you can just have an idea in your head and then just make it, like, whatever it is. And as long as you can code it and turn it into a game, there you go. But these days, you know, you have a team of people, like, looking over something, and it's so, like, scrutinized. I feel like that maybe it's like a too many cooks spoil the stew type of thing. But then again, there's like indie games, like on the Xbox, like Live Arcade, where like indie publishers, it's just a couple guys making it. So that type of game making is still alive today. But that's what it was all about back in the days of Atari 2600.
Video games have come a long way, and for the most part, they've gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
But there is a charm to Atari 2600 that it could never be matched again. Like, you could never make another Atari 2600 because it was just something that could only be done in that time.
But back when they actually made these games, the systems that they had to make these games on were very, very difficult to use. Like, these games were hard to make. The shit that they had to do to fucking make these games back then was insane. Like,
they were pioneers.
Yeah, I heard that you had to be, like, there was only 50 guys in the world that were smart enough to not only be able to actually code the thing, you know, to do the math and everything involved, but also to be creative enough to make a fun game. Mm-hmm. So it was a real skill to be able to do this back then. So I have a lot of respect for the people who worked on Atari.
Mm-hmm. If you want to know more about Atari, check out Once Upon Atari.
Hosted by Howard Scott Warshaw.
Yeah. Now, we're going to play some Atari, and we're probably going to break this video up into many parts. So you're going to see more Atari videos as time goes on.
I think we're going to talk about some more classic games, and then we'll get into some other stuff later.
We'll start 101. We'll start with more, you know, famous Atari games.
You got your Pac-Man, you got your Space Invaders. All right, let's check them out.